When I first started these, I thought I was going to do like one a week, and so far, if I'm lucky, I do one a month. But anyway, today I wanted, because of the recent election and all, I wanted to talk about the Constitution and democracy versus republic. And there's a lot of people that are always on screen somewhere talking about, we're a democracy. We have to save our democracy. And the fact is if you've paid any attention in school, I think if you're in school, you should know that this is a republic, not a democracy. And we're a republic with democratic aspects. And in our early history in some of the original states, New England specifically, they had town hall meetings whereby the citizens would enact ordinances, laws directly, and that's a democracy like ancient Athens, where the citizens would gather and they would pass laws. We're closer at this moment to the original Roman Republic, which you elect representatives to go to a legislature or town council or whatever, and they represent you, the citizen, and pass laws that we technically should be abiding by. This didn't just happen. The people that wrote the Constitution, and first let me say this: we live under a contract with the citizens. So our government is a business-like contract, and it was created by people who thought long and hard about what type of government we as citizens should have. And they were some of the best read people we've ever had to represent us. When after the Revolution, our first contract was called the Articles of Confederation, and we had a Congress, a Continental Congress, but essentially what you had were 13 separate little countries who had gathered under a confederacy. And don't equate that with the Confederacy of 1861, 1865, because that was a confederacy, but it was different. This confederacy was technically in charge, and we were doing a very bad job, and the European powers were just waiting for us to totally collapse. So others, and specifically James Madison, who's known as the father of the Constitution, got together in a constitutional convention, which if you pay any attention, you know that took place, and representatives from the various states came together and began working on what we now call the Constitution. And they had studied Athens and Rome, the Venetian Republic, the Republic of Florence during the Renaissance, the Swiss Confederation, and so they had looked at various forms of government and various ways and the way things work. And they were convinced that a democracy essentially falls into mob rule, and individuals or minorities don't have any control. So, and remember now, these states had total say-so in whether or not they were going to accept anything. So the Constitution, the U.S. government, as you know it now, was created by the states, the first 13 states. And they got together and made this Constitution that we live under now. And one of the things was, which we all know about, is to represent the people as a whole, direct representation of the people. They set up the House of Representatives, and that's where you elect people by population. So New York State and Virginia, Pennsylvania, who were the most populous states at that time, they would have more people in the House of Representatives than Delaware or South Carolina or where, so forth. So That was done. Then the Senate, because of the fear that the smaller states had of the more populous states of being controlled by those states, then the Senate was composed. Every state had two senators, and originally those senators were appointed by their state legislatures. So the senators represented these states, and they were set up, kind of modeled on the House of Lords in the Parliament, to be a debating society whereby they would take things, because all bills originate in the House of Representatives. That's goes just the way it is, because it represents all the people by population. So all bills originate there. Then they go to the Senate, and the Senate was meant to be a firewall against people who go nuts, and we know that happens, and they try to ram things through. So the Senate was set up to debate and essentially to compromise. And I know compromise is seen as evil by a lot of people, but it's worked out fairly well most of the time. In business, which I was in for a long time, the saying was, if both parties came away unhappy, then you probably had a fairly decent compromise. So anyway, so you had, under the Constitution, you had that, and then the House and the Senate will get together and basically, because a lot of times they're going to totally disagree, and they'll have sessions where they work on those and come out with those. Then it goes to the executive branch. Now, the executive branch originally, and the executive branch, the president, contrary to what most of us think, is not elected by popular vote. I know we're all familiar with the Electoral College, but again, originally the electors were chosen by the state legislators, and then they went and voted. Originally it was later than now, because it took longer to get places on the presidency. And technically the electors can vote for anybody they want to, but over time, and especially with the advent of political parties, then they began to represent, like with Jefferson and Hamilton and Adams and so forth, with the various parties. They began to represent a set of electors for this candidate or a set of electors for that candidate would be chosen, and then the president would be elected. Now, the presidency basically is not an all-powerful, should not be an all-powerful individual who can do whatever they want. They're subject to the laws of the republic. And the Congress really was meant to be the most powerful of the three branches, because one, no money gets leveled without Congress. I mean, you can't pass taxes, you can't go out and get money, you can't do it. The president can't get whatever money he wants. The bureaucrats can't get whatever money they want. It has to start with the House, go through the Senate, be a bill that goes to the president. The president can sign or not sign the bill. If he vetoes the bill, then the Congress can override the veto if they have enough votes. And everything has got high thresholds. And this, to the people that complain that that's slow, it was meant to be slow. It was meant to be cumbersome, because the founders did not think that if you could ram things through, you should not be able to do that, because you might pass things and have things done that you would live to regret later. You need to think things through. And again, that's kind of what the Senate was for. The House could go berserk, like and yell and scream and holler and so forth and so on, and get up some crazy bills and send them to the Senate. Then the Senate can go, and they can look at it and change that. And then they've got to come together. Then it goes to the presidency. You know, the president is the only office that represents the entire country. But again, that is through an electoral college, whereby, and I hear this complaint, Wyoming has 3 electors because they have 2 senators and 1 congressman. And California, I think, has something like 50 some odd congressmen and 2 senators. So they have a much larger population. And I've heard people say, well, the Senate should reflect the population. No, the Senate represents the states, and the states created the Union. And we all tend to forget that. So you have to understand that in order for the Union to work, then the state legislatures have, the governors have power. And some of that started to decline actually with the Civil War, the American Civil War, because Abraham Lincoln took a lot of power to the federal government, and the centralization of the federal government became stronger and stronger during that time and after that time, and has continued to this day. And there are a lot of people who are very much in favor of total power going to the central government, which is not what the founders wanted. The smaller states have a say-so, and that was meant to be. So I don't want to go on too long on this, but this is kind of a civics lesson, which most people should know anyway. But it's not a democracy. It's a republic. And every time somebody says, well, we're a democracy, they either don't know what they're talking about or they're just trying to make points. Because the democratic part of this is you as a citizen can elect your state legislatures, which normally in most states have 2 houses also, and your governors and lieutenant governors and other various representatives in the executive branch. Because a lot of people in the executive branch in the states are elected directly. But you do not make laws directly. Now, in some other states, there are still some towns and so forth where you can do that. But by and large, the whole country is built on a Republican basis. And that's by intent. And without that, and it's worked fairly well for 240, 50 years at this point. The Roman Republic, I think, lasted like 500 years. And then they couldn't deal with a lot of things, and it devolved into civil wars and then into the empire. But even the first emperor, Augustus, he still made it look like it was a republic, even though he was the only guy in charge. So democracy, republic, we're a republic. Remember that, and when you're talking to people. And all the compromises that were set up in the Constitution were set up because we wouldn't have had the Constitution without the compromises, and many states would not just southern states, which I hear a lot, would not have accepted the Constitution. So the Constitution gave us a stronger government. It was more centralized than under the Articles of Confederation. There were things that Alexander Hamilton wanted and Thomas Jefferson wanted, and they were the primary fighters after the Constitution started, and bitter enemies. I would say on some ways Jefferson ended up primary, but in many ways the country we have really more represents Alexander Hamilton's views as far as business and the way government runs and so forth and so on. But they both, when all was said and done, believed in the Republican form of government, which is what we have. So think about that, and if you want to read up like on James Madison, who was responsible for a lot of this. And Hamilton and Madison, I forget the other man, wrote the Federalist Papers, which you really should read, which were published in defense or advocating the passing of the Constitution. And actually Hamilton wrote most of those, but if you get the opportunity to read those, then you'll understand a whole lot more about who we are and how we got here.